Hello everybody and welcome back to my custom chess position. What's your decision? So in this video I want to go over the 1f4 f5 idea for white. The last video that I created in this uh, variation, I concluded that there was a new line. So if I go through it, um, for c5, so it's this particular defense with c5 and d5, and where black doesn't take on f5, at least not right away. Um, and in this position, this knight d3 move, which I discussed in 2025, actually ended up being winning for white. So what I had concluded last video was the main move was knight c6, and after knight c6, white was winning with a very forced sequence, and it's very difficult to find and not easy to win, but white was winning. So the move was takes, and I'll just go over this quickly because I've discussed this before, but the line just went like this. And after queen d8, white was winning in this position. So I concluded that that this opening was winning for white. So, but now we fast forward to 2026, because in 2026, very recently, I found that in this opening, actually black has one defense. So let's go through the moves. So we arrive at this knight d3 move, and last year I had discussed the move bishop takes d3, which is the move that black has. But when I had discussed it last year, I said that white was still winning. However, through analyzing this position with the computer, and the computer has gotten better at these types of positions as well. So through analyzing this, I found that black is actually not losing. So the move bishop takes d3 frees white's queen and bishop. So black is voluntarily freeing the queen and bishop, but we already saw that the move knight c6 instead loses by force, as white just takes in the center and then sacrifice the knight and then frees their pieces anyway. So because white is going to get their pieces out, in this position, black could consider voluntarily freeing white's pieces. Of course, that means white is not going to have to sacrifice to free their pieces. However, um, white won't just completely break through everything, all the defenses around black's king. So bishop takes d3 is played, because in the line that I showed you that was winning for white, white sacrificed a lot of pieces, but black's king was very weak at the end. Now black's king will still be weak in this position, but not as weak as the other position. So the move c takes d3 is played. White does the recapture, and then the key move over here is g takes f5. So that's the move I had not discussed before. Last year I had discussed like knight c6, and I had discussed b5, so I won't go over them in this video. But the winning move is to take on f5 after taking on d3. And this move actually holds for black. I hadn't considered it last year because it seems like a slow sort of move to play when white is just trying to like break through, take in the center, and then take with the bishop, and then take with the rook on c3. So it feels like this is a waste of time, but there's actually a really good idea behind g takes f5, and it has to do with this f6 pawn being weak. Now the rook can go to e6 and take on f6. So after g takes f5, e takes d4, white continues with this move, and then rook e6 is the move over here. If rook e1 is played, then d takes c5, rook takes g1, d4, knight e6. C6 is played, and I've also showed this last year actually. After c6 is played, black is just really struggling to free this knight and bishop over here, and white has the advantage. But um, instead we have rook e6. And after rook e6, white has a couple of options. Um, the less will, I think both options are good, but I think d takes c5 is slightly better. So I'll cover rook takes c3 first. So in this position, white is taking on c3, and if black were to take back, it's losing, um, because d5 cuts off the king's escape to c6, and now queen c4 check and queen a4 mate is coming. So rook takes c3, um, and the move here is actually c6. So black doesn't immediately take with the rook on f6, and the reason I guess behind this move is not as clear, but anyhow, the theory move that the engine suggests, especially after thinking on more depth, is c6 first, which is going to be a useful move anyways, as it's going to be able to develop the knight and bishop in the corner. So after c6, there are several moves that black could play, and one of these is d takes c5. After d takes c5, rook takes f6 is played, and in g4, f takes g4, c takes b6. Now, at this point, white is threatening to play rook c5 check, and then to take on f6, but black first takes on h6, giving up their rook, but then they check, queen f6 check, moving the king back to g3. This prevents a knight from going to g3, which is why black plays that check first before taking on c3. White takes back, black recaptures, h takes g4, knight takes b6, bishop c5, knight e6, d4, knight takes, d takes, knight d5, knight f2. And this is an endgame position. White will have the slight advantage, but it is not winning and at all. And it's just an endgame position. Both sides have two bishops, a knight, and a rook. Black's slight advantage is that their two bishops are of different colors, whereas white's two bishops are of the same color. White's advantage is that they have a little bit more development, and I think they have a little bit easier time doing with their pawn promotion ideas as well, though it's very close. So that's with d takes c5 in this position, but rook takes c5 check, which looks like it shouldn't work because we're just giving up the rook, but that's another move because after b takes and d takes c5, the queen now is defending f6. However, knight c7, bishop e3, and knight b5 are played, or b6 could be played in this position, and we have a game. So yeah, bishop d2 and b6 and so on. So here white sacrificed the rook, but black can't free their pieces, at least not immediately. However, it's still kind of weak, this f6 pawn, and probably eventually black's going to get the pieces out or get some good compensation, which is why this is not winning for white either. Then the other move which I found kind of surprising here was d5, which sacrifices a pawn. Also, the pawn, like black's pawn, could go to d4 and have a strong structure, as well as when they take, the rook could go to c6 potentially. So d5 was interesting, but after c takes d5, rook f1, which is an engine move, well, I guess to prevent the rook from, in some cases, going to e1. Rook takes f6 is played, and yeah, I put only rook f1 as the only move over here because when I looked at the engine analysis, which when I analyze the position myself, I have a slightly different setting where the I can try to do it now where they have two threads, George 4, and yeah, it recommends rook f1 as the it's a clear favorite move, though at lower depth right now we're at depth 21 up here, showing rook c1 also as a move. Um, so in any case, both moves could work. Let me just put rook c1 on the board. Knight c7, and now rook f1, d4, and it does take a minute to load. Um, so black will, in this line, they will get the sacrifice on f6 um, off, though maybe here was the wrong time to play it. So yeah, just a little bit of updates to the line live. So h takes g4, knight d5, so knight d5 is played, and it's not realizing that I haven't taken on f6 yet. So yeah, the engine sometimes just takes some time on chess.com to even realize what move has been played. So it doesn't realize that I've put knight d5 on the board. So after knight d5, probably the move would be for white to go for something like g3. So right now it's still analyzing rook takes f6. The computer hasn't realized that I've put another move onto the board. So let's see if it realizes. Otherwise, I can come back to this later. So yeah, I'll come back to this. Let's see if I can get it to. Yeah, so here. Um, yeah, so after knight d5, it looks like the engine's suggesting f5, knight e3, f takes e6, knight takes g2 check, king h3, knight f4, rook takes f4, bishop takes e7 as the top line. We let the engine think a little bit. So now after f5, It's rook takes f6. And you can see the engine takes some time to think and the evaluation will fluctuate a little bit, but this is a sharp line. Now, so after rook takes f6, it looks like even, but bishop takes. Here we don't want to play queen takes d4 because then rook takes h6 will come with check and then we'll take on here. So rook takes here. Now knight e6 is played. Knight g3. So these are like only moves, and it's obviously we can't take because rook takes f1, but now rook takes h6 check, and it's all of a sudden this line is better for black. Knight h5. Rook takes h5 check. This is a crazy line. G takes h5, queen e5. It's fun to discover new things while going through this. The queen e5, yeah, the f4, f5 lines are extremely tactical. g3 only move. And then in this position, looks like a couple moves can be played, but if there's a clear best move, we continue the line, which looks like it could be knight e3, but f6 also is pretty good. Yeah, knight e3, f6. Now it's saying f6 is better. f6 or knight e3. So going all the way back, that's with rook c1, which I guess apparently so black can get a slight advantage, at least with playing rook c1 and rook f1. But after rook f1, which was a move that I had prior to um, showing this, so prior to this stream, so rook f1. Now rook takes f6. Then after rook takes f6, we have rook takes c5 check and queen takes f6. So in this position, we kind of get another endgame. Rook c6 takes on f6. g5, rook takes f4, rook takes, bishop takes c5, knight c7, and again we appear in another endgame. This is interesting because white has 3 bishops. And once again, black's advantage is that their 2 bishops are of opposite colors, whereas white has 2 bishops of the same color, but perhaps white's doing a little better in pawn promotion and not development in this position, but maybe a little bit better in the pawn promotion. But it is close to even this position. So now we go all the way back here, which was that was the line with rook takes c3 in this position after rook e6. But the other move is d takes c5. So after, which is the main line, after d takes c5, what black can do is they can go and take on wait, let me just quickly look because the engine is saying one second. So after rook e6, d takes c5, just want to make sure we don't have rook e1 as a move over here. Okay, rook takes f6 is the move. and then g4, and then f takes g4, h takes g4, rook e6. So black moves the rook out of the way. Now knight g3 is played. So here black's queen is already out, so probably taking on c3 is not good because the queen could just take back. But okay, knight g3 is developing the knight. f6, and black is going for white's king. d4 is played, protecting the c5 pawn and preparing to take on c3. After this, black plays c6. F takes g5 check is not the best move in this position because okay, black sacrifices on g5 and and white is better. And the reason why white is better after taking, this is just all like tactical reasons, is because after c6, the best move actually for the engine um, is for white to take on f6, and the reason that is because after c6 the bishop aims at f4, so now the bishop could potentially sacrifice on f4, and then taking would bring the king right into the line of attack. So here the best move is g takes f6, and then there are two moves that can be played. One move is slightly better than the other, but I'll go over rook takes f, I mean sorry, queen takes f6 check first, which is fine, but not as good as rook takes f6. But this one's more forcing, so I just go to line g5, queen f8, knight f5, rook e1, bishop f2, rook h1. So the rook is going in, and then there's several after. In this position, there's like 4 different moves that can be played, which I'll go over briefly. So now white can just take this pawn on c3, giving up the bishop on but knight e3, rook d4. So white's giving up some material, but they're getting the knight in for a check. And then after these trades, they're taking on h7, bishop takes on f4, and we have ourselves a position, that's for sure. Going back, bishop g3 is another move, knight e6, and actually over here many moves can be played. So we have h3 as well, bishop d5, and again many moves can be played. So going back, the last move I have here is bishop e4. This one's a little bit more forcing, knight e6, bishop g3, bishop b takes c5, the f rook takes on c3, c takes d4, c2, knight takes f4, queen takes d4, knight g6 check, king h3, bishop takes g3, knight takes b6, knight f5, rook d8, queen c5 check, queen takes, rook takes, king b6, and bishop g4. So you can see like these a lot of times are getting into these like these endgame type positions. So that's with queen takes f6, but after g takes f6, the other move is rook takes f6. There's less theory to this one as more moves work. But after rook takes f6, the move is knight f5, and then many moves can be played. So I'll just go over each one. Knight c7, g3, and then so many moves can be played here as well. Knight d5, knight d6, knight b5, knight f7, bishop e6. So really anything goes in a position like this, and especially once the engine gets to like depth 30, it evaluates pretty much all these moves at like less than +1 for white. So definitely very interesting position, but lots of possibilities. As well as knight c7, bishop d5, knight f7 can be played, or b takes c5 are all playable moves in this position. But yeah, those are basically the moves that can be played. But if I just want to quickly before we end the video just go back and explain what was covered in this video. And what was covered was that due to knight c6 being a losing move for black, though this is not easy to win for white, um, bishop takes g3 emerges as the best move and the only move that doesn't lose, because after black takes on f5, um, black has their own ideas of rook e6 and rook takes f6 to free their own queen. So it isn't white that's going to be the only side that's going to be freeing their pieces. And it's true that in the current state of the position, if black were to sacrifice a rook to free their pieces, white hasn't sacrificed anything yet, but in this position, white does end up making sacrifices too, and it's more the king safety aspect of the position um, that comes into play, as well as the fact that a lot of that when the rook eventually does take on f6 for black, we normally can't take back either. So it's not like we're going to be down material most times in the first place. So it's really just tactics and king safety in this position. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and this is theory update right now. So this line no longer losing for black. All right, yep, that's about it.